loud.
Just in your
Okay, my name is Koliwe Majama. I work for the Media Institute of Southern Africa, and I'm honored to be moderating this panel because I think issues around fake news have carried the morning over from, just generally having the overview, and it's been thrown in almost every conversation that we've had, whether it's in main plenary or outside during side conversations. So I'm going to do things a little differently and get the panelists to give an introduction. We'll just have a round introduction, tell us who you are, and tell us what you think about fake news before we get into the serious stuff. Just what is it to you? Does it exist? How do you feel about it? So I'm gonna start to my extreme left. Jimmy, I'm sorry to put you in the spot.
Thank you, Koriwe. My name is Jimmy Kainja, as you said. I'm a lecturer in media and communication at University of Malawi, Chancellor College. Fake news is my interest, really, I would say, because been much interested in journalism, coming from that industry, briefly worked as a journalist. Does it exist or not? I think maybe it's a question of wording, maybe, because certainly, if you consider fake news as misinformation, deliberately or otherwise, it's there. It's been there, and it will be there, whether you have new media platforms or not. I think my main issue to do with fake news, basically, is the fact that it's some sort of, but there's this understanding that technology or fake news is technology-centered one way or the other, which I think it is not. And I think there are some dangers to it, which I think we'll discuss more as we go further on. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rachel Mugarura Mutana, and I work for the African Center for Media Excellence, which is a media development organization based in Kampala, Uganda. And yes, we've been joining this discourse on fake news in Uganda, in the East African region, and now further on. And for me, the challenge with fake news isn't just the definitions, but what to do, if anything, to counter fake news, because proposals have been made for legislation against fake news, which we know will wind us down quite a deep hole, will in fact drive real information underground. What the journalists can do, what the intermediaries can do, and I hope that this discussion will perhaps shed some light and open us up to proposals on what to do in Africa that's where our situations regarding traditional and new media and their consumption are quite different from those in the West. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tandy Smith from Media Monitoring Africa. We are a civil society organization analyzing and monitoring mainly news media in South Africa and other African countries. We interested, obviously, in the issue of so-called fake news, obviously because of the impact on media quality and media credibility, and that for us is a big issue. How it affects and impacts credibility of your legitimate media. I think what's interesting is that fake news is not a new phenomenon. It's something that's existed for years and years. I mean, since media itself, and we also don't necessarily refer to it as fake news, because the argument around, well, if it's fake, it's not news, but rather calling it misinformation or dodgy news. So I know that there are a lot of debates around that as well. And we're also interested in the practical solutions on how to combat it, because it is a real problem and it is a big threat.
So thank you, guys. Just to mention that the South African Press Ombudsman was supposed to join us, Joe Tlolwe, but he's not going to join us. So as much as possible, I will ask the panelists to also speak a little to ethics, because I think there's a lot of issues related to the quality of news that we are producing as the media now mainstream online aside, in terms of the quality of ethics and professionalism by both print, broadcasting as well. So with that said, Jimmy, let's hear what you have to say, especially in relation to even make reference to a little bit of training institutions. I come from Zimbabwe, and every time we have a media stakeholders conference, one of the issues that always bounces back is training institutions and the quality of people that they're channeling out into the sector as well. So just slightly fill in with that.
Thank you. I think one other thing that, or the first thing that I think we should have in mind here is that why we are so much concerned about fake news is the fact that if you think of media journalism specifically, it's very important to society in a sense that if you consider societies that should have citizens that publicly participating on issues that matter to the public, there's need for access to information. And quality participation basically needs quality information that people should have. Information that is factual, information basically that is tailored to empowering people in society and not otherwise. So I think this is very important when you think about fake news. But as I said earlier on, if we want to consider fake news in a broader term, I think it's better to look at it as misinformation. It can be deliberate sometimes or otherwise. I think when you consider it from that perspective, from where I come from, and I believe the same is the case across Africa, is that we cannot just begin to look at this in terms of maybe new technologies one way or the other. In my country, for instance, misinformation, majority of this information actually, ironically, comes from state broadcasters. You know, a lot of misinformation which actually could constitute to fake news as well, and that becomes a problem. Now, Korea here mentions about issues about training. I think journalism, as it is, it's not really bad about in terms of fake news and all, apart from deliberate manipulation of information, especially from state broadcasters, as I'm saying. But I think what is happening that increasingly we are unable to differentiate what is really journalism and what people out there, different people, trying to share information online, which is fine. But I think there is journalism in which it has its own ethics, if I may put it that way, you know, verifying information, fact-checking, and all those kind of things. That is happening, and I think that's the only way that journalism can get away from this whole issue about fake news. To add on to that, I think the critical issue about fake news as well is also a question of who is actually defining what fake news is all about. I might use an example. Last year, around this time, my president, again, I come from Malawi, overstayed at United Nations General Assembly for about a month. And everybody was wondering where the president is. We're not told about anything. 2 months later, BBC Africa debate on fake news, decided to have it in Malawi. I was one of the panelists there, so I asked this question, why Malawi? Said because Malawians are loyal listeners of BBC World Service. But what I figured out in the end is that the choice of the country is that because there was this talk about fake news about the president's death in Malawi and all that. But the truth is, what brought about all that issue, the people were demanding to know where the president is, and nobody was saying anything. Today I've seen front page newspapers in my country. Again, we don't know where the president is. The meeting ended a long time ago. So one way of looking at it basically is lack of information. People are desperate for information. If we provide information, we're talking about access to information. It's one way of getting away from fake news. I'm not trying to glorify it because there's a lack of information, therefore there should be fake news. But people speculate if there is no information whatsoever. I'll stop there for now. I'm sure I'll have a chance to say more later.
So thank you for that. And I think one of the fake news hitting headlines today is the resignation of the CNN reporters and the pull down by the CNN website of the story relating to Donald Trump's associate and ties to Russia. You spoke about internet intermediary liability, but now I'm going to throw it to you in terms of how accountable is a newsroom or a news platform in relation to a story that you have a public official saying is fake, demands or the pressure by the editorial team, because we've seen resignations. And now Jimmy's talking about same incidences locally here in Africa. To what extent do you think that a publication or a media platform can actually be accountable or can be pressured to make what would seem a fake news or unverified story without much information or people alluding to a specific person with this running story? How accountable can the media be?
I think we cannot run away from our accountability. We are accountable. There are media norms to which we all agree, and standards that we all agree to, and we can't run away from them. We are accountable to our audiences to verify information, like Jimmy said, to provide information that's accurate, and so on and so forth. So we can't run away from that. And if we're caught, you know, on the wrong side of things, we have to answer for them. But I think that more complex is the issue, I mean, that the US is facing now. It's a new issue, but for us, some of us in some of our African countries, we've faced a long time. What to do with a powerful leader who tells lies? And then report on that and, you know, spread the misinformation from a powerful person who lies. And not correct it, not point out the misinformation being spread, not indicate that this is propaganda, this is unverified, unchecked. And especially so with powerful leaders who lie about data, data that is not checked, opinion that is not countered, and so on and so forth. And I think that because Trump is in power, perhaps it's shed a stronger light on these issues. But it's something that we must grapple with. I find that too often the media in the part of the world from which I come from Eastern Africa, are merely megaphones for those in power. And not enough is being done to check and to verify. So we certainly need to do those. We need to remind ourselves of those. These are things, like Jimmy said, that are taught in journalism schools. But what is not taught in journalism schools is, for instance, what a gatekeeper does, what the role of the editor is, and how that is evolving in today's traditional and new media environment. And I think these are things that we should teach both new journalists and mid-career journalists, things that aren't taught in journalism schools.
Okay, thanks. Thandi, I know you have a presentation, which is not going to be very long, but I'm hoping that it's going to also tie up some of the issues in terms of the trends. Sometimes fake news is tied to online media, and largely so because they don't have the same status as people in the mainstream newsroom and the advantage of getting one-on-one interviews with authorities. So let's see what you have to say.
Thanks. It's more of a quick demo of one of the tools available to help identify potentially dodgy news sites. But before I get into that, which I'll show you, it will just take a couple of minutes. I really like the point around, well, the media is accountable for itself. And, you know, that's why we have regulatory systems, why we have regulatory mechanisms and bodies in place. And also the point around going in at a training level to look at your students up into the point of career entry, but then having to go and retrain mid-career journalists, because I think with the kinds of technologies and the platforms that is changing the way journalism well, changing traditional journalism, we're seeing so much change over just a matter of years that you can't apply what you learned 5 years ago in you know, a training institute to practice now. It's just it's interesting. But what I wanted to show you was, as Media Monitoring Africa, we obviously, you know, come in and do the research and try and collect the evidence to support a lot of the theory or the research that we do, and feed that into policy and regulation. So we've developed this Chrome extension that you can download. It's free to download from the Google Web Store. And what you'll see is if you if you just open a Google page, the top right-hand corner, sorry, there's a little icon that appears, and that is the logo for the Chrome extension. If you click on it, you'll see that it comes up with a little card and it says unknown. That means that that site has not yet been reported to us as an institution, and it hasn't been classified. If you look at, and this is, I'm using South African media examples. At the moment, this is something that can be applied wherever you are, because it's based on URL and not much else in terms of a tech perspective. So if you look at something like Times Live, you'll see that it comes up with trusted content and that they're a member of our press council. And that gives it, that added level of credibility if you're the member of the self-regulatory body. If you look at something like IOL, which is a credible news organization, according to our indicators of what constitutes credibility, it's still trusted, but it doesn't have the press council membership. If you have a look at what we consider a site that contains potentially dodgy news, or, because this is also the problem with a lot of these news sites, is that they pull a lot of trustworthy content or a lot of legitimate content from credible news sites, pasted onto their sites. So you get very confused about what is actually, what you can trust and what you can't. So we say that this is a site that you should take caution with, be warned. We're not claiming it as a fake news site, but we're saying, this content has been reported before as containing misinformation or having a certain political agenda with furthering dodgy news or misinformation, and you should just think twice about actually sharing or believing what you look at. So it's just something, I think, a little bit more positive, in that there are solutions, and there are institutions that are trying to come up with practical ways of addressing some of these issues at a very practical, citizen-oriented level. I think that a lot of the conversations that are taking place happen at, or are directed at media themselves, at academic institutions, and at regulatory levels. And we coming in saying, well, that's great, but we have to focus on digital literacy for citizens themselves to become aware of these issues, and to understand what you're using and how you're using it online when you're dealing with issues of fake news.
Thank you for that. So the assumption that it would increase citizens' intelligence around, is it specific news items, or is it a website in general?
I think this particular one is about a website in general, because, like I said before, it's difficult to identify exactly item by item what would be classified as legitimate or not. I think in terms of having an automatic reaction to that, because I think similar, but it's often a reactionary process, which then takes a little bit of time to come back and be verified. Whereas this, we're saying, okay, this, according to Media Monitoring Africa's criteria, we would consider this as credible, and you can feel okay about trusting some of it. You might not agree with it, and you might have very different opinions on what content is there, but it is a legitimate news site. Whereas something like WMC Leaks, just be careful about what you're reading, think twice about sharing it, just create more of a self-awareness of the kind of content that you're consuming as a user.
Okay, so a few points to note. Issues relating to fake news always having existed as misinformation or propaganda. And Jimmy said something really interesting about how state broadcasters seem to be in the forefront of channeling out fake news. But again, who defines what is fake news? And I think as we start to think about this, you think about independent platforms. I see Fungai is here. You have a platform and you have user-generated content. Realistically, how can you actually verify before you publish user-generated content? The extent to which it is authentic news. There's also interesting points around what is it that we need to be going back to in terms of our training. What's the role of a gatekeeper? What does it mean? And how does fake news get influenced by editorial policy and advertising, which we haven't actually spoken to? And then also looking at the possibility of media monitoring platforms being able to assist and build the literacy around being able to decipher whether this is a genuine news platform that you can happily click away and increase the number of clicks on that specific platform. So we're going to open up for a round of questions. And then I think we'll take about 3-4 questions in the first round, and then take another round. Questions or comments?
Hi, my name is Ashraf. I'm a human rights lawyer from Egypt. Just I want to talk about our experience in Egypt with fake news. There are 2 reasons. First is one of the unknown kind of websites who want to do some kind of trafficking, so people can traffic. So this is like, I can call it a little bit innocent, because the other purpose is to create, what I call, create a parallel regime, takes the good decisions to cool the public opinion down. When there is like lots of anger among the public opinion, some fake news as if the president or the regime took good decisions and asked for the, for example, for the prosecution of the perpetrators, which is not the case. Several attempts in my country to create the so-called media watch, in order its only purpose is to name and shame these kind of websites. I imagine that maybe it's an idea that to be done on the continental level, because you cannot, it's a strong means of manipulating the public opinion all over the continent. So I think there could be like something regional, a regional kind of entity in order to name and shame these kind of fake websites. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think in the earlier discussion that we had, very interesting, and I'll give you a scenario in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, we have fuel shortages now, okay? Well, one would say it's fake news if they drove past their service stations in their neighborhood or within their vicinity and found that they did have fuel. But if 3-4 other people drove to 2 service stations within their radius and didn't get fuel, they would definitely say that someone was circulating fake news. So the bigger question is who qualifies and who determines what is fake news? Because more often than not, what we saw back in Zimbabwe is government responding to it. So of course there was a reduction of fuel coming through. But that is not to say people who did get up and share information or film certain service stations without fuel circulated fake news. So this is just also food for thought, is who is giving the official statement? So if a government official says there is fuel, even though for a significant number of people there was no fuel, is it fake news or is it not? Yeah. Any other questions, comments? So would you guys respond to that before we get into another?
I don't have a direct response, but just thinking about who defines fake news and the conversation that we've been having, and the idea that the state then propagates a lot of false news and misinformation to quell public fears or to fight against democratic uprising is something that I certainly identify with and I have seen in lots of places around the continent. In Uganda, we have a president who consistently, regularly delegitimizes traditional media and trusted news sources by saying publicly on those same news sources, journalists are wrong, they are lying to you, and so on and so forth. And what that does for the country is then to I mean, it has a ripple effect, because if the president says it often enough, and his functionaries say it often enough, and there is no free access to the media, free information sharing, then certainly the traditional media it being labeled fake news is an easy path to go down to. And I so agree with Jimmy and with Tandy. That the access to information is just so important. The two are so interlinked in a continent in which primary important information is withheld by the government. There's been a number of reports around the continent on trust in the media, and not too long ago, Afrobarometer released information speaking to just this one thing, that while there is still majority trust in traditional media sources, the number of people who now question or would like government to introduce regulations on free expression on the internet has gone up. And the two are sort of like, they're in parallels, but somewhere along there is an answer to, there is a conversation to be had on declining trust in the media, continued state efforts to undermine the media, and then the onslaught of fake news or not true news, as Tandy put it, and what that does to people's perceptions of what they are receiving on a daily basis.
Yes, I think we have to accept here that the information, the issue of information here is a question of power. The whole issue of who defines fake news, one way or the other, as it was said there in the audience, of course, there's the question of clickbait, somebody just trying to make quick money. And I think that sort of fake news, I don't think it will stay for too long from as internet moves on, society moves on one way or the other. But the most malicious is the kind of fake news that comes out as proper journalism, something that people should actually trust in. I remember I was young then, growing up in Malawi under Kamu's Banda's dictatorship. He would not go to public rallies without shouting, journalists are liars. We had only one radio then, two newspapers, one weekend and one weekly, all controlled by government. It's more or less like what Trump says today, basically, points at New York Times, CNN as fake news. That's what he was saying then. So it's a question of power in this case that what we're talking about here, we're talking about a period in which we have new media technologies that have allowed the people, one way or the other, to contribute to public information. So governments are neighbors, really, across the continent. You can see with issues of internet shutdowns and stuff. So what we need to do also here, I think we need to be really careful here. When you discuss about fake news, we need to be looking at how journalism can change or conduct themselves. Because if we implicate too much this issue online as well, I think there's a danger. And this danger comes in this way that then we have these governments that are fighting, open internet, coming to censor internet in the name of shutting down fake news. So we really need to be careful here that when you say fake news, we're not really just talking about certain technologies. We're talking about information that really matters in society, including governments themselves hiding information that they should be giving to the public. Thank you.
Okay, so Tandy, before you come in, so Ashraf, I see he's left, has spoken to issues to do with naming and shaming, which, as he said that, I looked at that Chrome extension thingy-mabob you have and thought that's, in a sense, it is a naming and shaming game. What have your observations been in terms of the number of visits to specific sites that have been tagged with warning symbols on them? Do you think that it has increased literacy, and do you think it's overall going to change, the current situation?
So I don't have a lot of stats on that at the moment because the extension was launched about 2-3 weeks ago. So it's a very new development that we're using. But it's going to be very interesting to see that. And, you know, I think that the conversation at the moment in the room is really, there are a few important things to note, and it's about the fundamental basics of journalism. And, you know, I think we're seeing a scenario where suddenly people have access to various platforms, access to information, and that being you know, on the internet, but it doesn't change what journalism is. It doesn't change what the media is. It's just a matter of we now have these new tools to disseminate information, and you know, I think we see that politicians and political leaders, I mean, we wouldn't be in the space that we're in if they didn't know the importance and the power that the media has. Now, having said that, just going back to the issue of, well, naming and shaming, it's so difficult to pin down exactly who is behind what information. And it's because of the kind of technologies and the tools used to disseminate this. And what we need to remember is, I think, Jimmy, you also touched on it earlier, where there are two very different reasons for you know, spreading misinformation or spreading fake news. And that is, the one is the purely commercial sort of clickbait type prominence of fake news. And then on the other hand, the complete political agenda and the shaping the narrative, changing public perception, which is far more dangerous. And it also becomes very difficult to name and shame. And I think that at this point, there, other than your fact-checking sort of institutions, there aren't many bodies that actually come out and say, okay, you know, we're naming and shaming these entities, because it's so difficult to track them down. And I think, you know, that's why for us, it's leaning more towards trying to focus on digital literacy and literacy for citizens, because you become, the more aware you become of these issues and the more aware you become of being able to identify what is misinformation and what is fake news, the more you can then yourself almost name and shame these entities. Because as much as, you know, we're asking the question of who's identifying the fake news, it's, well, who's then behind naming and shaming them? And how do you name and shame them? And what are those indicators that body uses to name and shame? So I think it's far more complex than and that's why we don't have simple solutions at the moment.
Okay, yeah, so there's a hand up there, and as someone is bringing the mic to you, I think the CNN story I was talking about, they've redefined it, and because you were talking about journalism, to say, can we call it fake news? Because fake news is about journalism, but this is actually cyber fraud. Because you're pushing a fake news story and you know you're going to make money, so it's criminal. But then it also comes back to the extent to which we as the media can self-regulate, and like Tanti is saying, to what extent can the existing bodies that we're accountable to or that are watchdogs, to what extent can they set a measurement that will stand and hold? Yeah. Nhlanhla, your hand was up. There's no mic?
Hello, I've got a bit of flu, so my voice is bad. But my name is Nokyaka Chanza. I'm an activist with the Right to Know campaign. I think my greatest worry with the fake news phenomenon is that in South Africa, it has been provided for in the cybercrime bill. It's going to be a criminal offense. And for me, that is huge. And what is worse is that, well, if I resend that message, so basically all of us, we might end up being in jail. The journalists can't even report on such kind of incidences. And for me, that worries me a lot, because we are talking about something that is in a bill before Parliament, and who knows where we will be by December, you know. Maybe at the next internet forum I'll be in jail because I circulated what you had said happened to be. And how they view it as well, that it's also harmful content. And then I guess then the question is like, then who define these things? You know, who makes those kind of decisions? But what I'm interested in knowing is, in dealing with this issue, I mean, I understand digital literacy has got to happen, and we often talk about that on a whole number of issues, but it ends up being just a few organizations doing it. A lot of us, we talk, but we don't actually do the work, especially at grassroots level. And there's a part of me that really thinks that ISPs have got a role to play here, but I'm not really sure what they are doing right now, and if there's anything, or if they should have a role at all, or if any of the panelists know if there's anything that they are doing and how we can engage with them. Because I think this is going to be an issue where everybody has got to play a role of some sort before we all end up in jail. Thanks.
Okay, Nonhlanhla, we can see you're one of those people who circulate fake news. And we can't guarantee you protection, my sister. So I think the question relates to whether you guys feel that internet service providers should play a role in terms of accountability relating to the spread of news, number one. But I also think what is critical is, can we actually trace where a news story that is fake originates from? Realistically, within your jurisdictions, because where I come from in Zim, a lot of the news that we get is by word of mouth. And secondly would be WhatsApp. So you don't actually have a logo or someone's name on it. It's simply a copy and paste, because someone could have actually gone onto a website and pulled it down to share it on WhatsApp. So what's your opinion? What do you guys think about that?
I think there's several issues here. Issues of service providers, I think, is a tricky one because we need to be mindful of the fact that these service providers do not operate in a vacuum. Yeah, they are restricted to legal frameworks given a given country. Now, given that these service providers are in the business of not empowering people but making money, it becomes a problem basically for them to provide, or should I say, to disregard maybe demands from governments, because then what happens is easier for governments to revoke operating licenses, sometimes maybe even bringing in new tax regimes, which means less money, or just a simple case of bringing in more players on the market. So there are all sorts of ways that they are mindful about in terms of governments. And also I think in societies, sometimes it's, as she says, word of mouth plays a key role. I think there are things sometimes that we as a people, in terms of our cultures, we believe in things that makes it easier for us to believe in information that is not actually true. I was teaching a class of journalists, and in Malawi, there's been lots of stories about a witchcraft airplane has landed somewhere, has fallen somewhere. You see this in, as proper news being reported. So I was asking, who knows, a witchcraft airplane? Because these are just myths, but it's reported as true. Is that fake news? But if people believe in all these myths, basically, so somebody, comes up with a story around it, it becomes an issue that people could believe. I think around 2005, 2006, in Malawi, when the late President Mutharika came to power, there's an issue that Mutharika was not sleeping in a state house because he's afraid of ghosts and what have you in that state house. And I know 2-3 colleagues, journalists, were actually arrested, for spreading fake news and stuff. And this is information that journalists themselves could not prove, because you can't see ghosts. There's not really anything that you can prove it. But society believed just because of the myths that are there. So I think there's also issue to be with what is fake news and what is people. What is it that people can easily believe based on what they believe already? Myths, basically. Thank you.
I am as horrified as you about that bill that South Africa has tabled before Parliament. Uganda is going down the same route. Ours hasn't yet got to Parliament. But it's on the journey to amend our media laws to reinstate a law that was struck off and found unconstitutional that criminalized false news. And I think that's just a knee-jerk reaction from governments who are seeing essentially their power over information and these spaces slip away, and are also responding to what they're hearing in this space. If we talk enough about it, they will legislate it. So maybe we're making a mountain out of a molehill. Maybe we should say, rather than repeat a fake news story, or we counter it with narratives that are correct, rather than repeat the falsehood over and over again. It's just unfortunate that this is the way things are going. And I do hear you about the idea that very few of us are participating in digital and news literacy. And at my organization, African Center for Media Excellence, we find it very, very, very hard to get anyone interested in paying us to teach this, or funding the process. But our same countries pour lots and lots of money into financial literacy, into consumer literacy. We have to make noise and make the case for that same private funding, philanthropic funding, whatever it is, to go into news literacy and digital literacy. And I know UNESCO has done quite a lot about integrating these into curricula and so on, but I know from my own experience in my country, that's not happening. It's not happening at all. It looks good on paper, but it's not happening. But we need to make the case and make it as loudly as possible. My own experience is that these sorts of conversations take place here. And I am as guilty as everybody else of leaving them here. But we really need to do more to make a case for funding of, support of, and integration of these literacy courses in all aspects, for all ages.
Tandy? Do you have a response?
Rachel, I absolutely love the idea of the good narrative, combating the bad narrative. And it's something I think that has come up in a couple of discussions where, how do you combat negative content? And it's well, you put through an overwhelming amount of good content. And it's about taking ownership of the space as a user, as the audience, and holding those who are producing the content accountable. And I think I was mentioning this earlier, but it's again going back to the fundamentals of journalism itself. And when you as media or as a journalist put the time in to investigate the story, to focus on the quality, to focus on context, to focus on the elements that make a good story, you're not going to get many people questioning whether it's fake news or not. And I think it brings up the issue around, well, how has the platforms that we're using for media changed the way that journalism is being produced? But on the other side of that argument is a bit of research that we did about looking at the changing of production processes within the newsroom given the technological impact on journalism. And the basic issues that we have with quality of media tend to actually be the same, which is really interesting because everyone's suddenly up in arms about online journalism and the journalism that's become very short, very headline-based, very event-based, and all of that. But the way that we're reporting, the way issues of representation, issues of gender, issues of race, all of that tends to be the same. So whether we're making a mountain out of a molehill out of this is something that we need to think about. But having said that, I think that all these issues that are being raised are completely legitimate, especially the issue of the cyber crimes bill. And it's not the only one. I know as South Africa, and I think that this is happening across the continent, and I'd love to hear some other perspectives as well. But we have about 4 different government departments trying to regulate the same space with different regulations. So as much as there are practical problems and practical challenges on a journalist user sort of level, we at a regulatory level are completely, I mean, it's chaos. And we sort of need to just, bring it back and try and get back to basics. And I mean, South Africa is lucky as a country that we have an incredible constitution that can guide a lot of these regulations. But I'm sure, we might get into that later.
Yeah, there's a hand up at the end, but as we're waiting for the mic, Nonhlanhla, the issue around the role that the internet service providers should play is very tricky as well, because when you look in some jurisdictions that have interception laws, there are provisions for compliance. But when we talk about internet intermediary liability, it's a no-no, which is why in Zimbabwe we already are, because we're looking at our 3rd draft of the cybercrimes bill. And one of the issues that is a bone of contention is the issue around assistance. As a tech provider or a professional hacker or an internet service provider where you are obliged to assist. So for me, my quick response would be internet intermediary liability, no. If there's going to be some form of enforcement, I think the states need to be prepared for it. In the Zimbabwean draft bill, we have a cybersecurity center. And if we then start to qualify fake news as a cyber crime, there should be mechanisms in place to be able to find where it originated from without making the service provider liable. Then the other issue relates to the circulation or redistribution. And I think this was an issue for us in Zimbabwe with the revenge porn or distribution of intimate images without consent. Is you became liable for the production, the possession, and the distribution. So now when we start to talk about issues of digital literacy or media literacy, you did not know it was fake news because of the way it was packaged. So to what extent can we argue around your responsibility or liability? Because at some point, the more we circulate fake news, the more it affects a certain targeted person. So I think it's a debate that we should have, but we should be clear that a service provider cannot be forced to assist in tracking the, where a news story has originated from. That should be the responsibility of, the cybercrimes committee or team or whatever task force is set up. So that's just my quick response to that. So there was
Good afternoon. My name is Biko Mtaurwa. I'm with the Right to Know campaign, but right now I wish to speak from an individual point of view. So do not associate what I'm saying with the organization from which I come from. Not to say that it should take anything away from what I'm saying. I think that in ordinary life, when you're having conversation with friends and in a pub, at a party, in a house, in a lounge, people have a right to lie, you know what I mean? For many reasons, people can lie to entertain, people can lie because they're covering some pain, But you don't send your friend to jail for lying, And I think it should be the same on the internet, you know what I mean? It's your, if you're gonna act on a piece of information, it's your responsibility to find out whether it's actually true, but a lie is an expression, you know what I mean? And when we're talking about freedom of expression, we're also talking about the freedom to lie, you know? A lie can be a good piece of art. People have a right to speculate, you know, to hypothesize, to imagine. They don't always have to put a disclaimer, you know?
Like you did at the beginning.
Well, yeah, because I'm in this forum and I'm not sure of my positioning. Having said that, I think, though, institutions and practitioners who say we are journalists, we are media practitioners, and our business is to provide you with the facts. And where we give you opinions, we'll specify that this is an opinion. These institutions self-subscribe to a set of ethics and values and must be held to account for that self-subscription, right? But those of us who reserve the right to lie in public should be left alone. And all these pieces of legislation, from hate speech bill, cyber crime, cyber security bill, the film and publications board bill, all these bills that want to limit and restrict our right to lie, I think they should be scrapped. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Biko. Safe to say also that as you lie, you want to acknowledge that you do have a following who are at risk of circulating or sharing the lie, as Nonhlanhla said. And so when you think about lying within the digital context, it's not the lie you told in your bedroom. It moves faster as well than a lie in the pub, because only the people who are in the pub will remember you lied the last time when you tell the same story. But I don't know what the panelists think.
Amen to the right to lie. But I think what sets you know, this specific brand of fake news apart is sort of like the intent. So when I'm having a conversation with my friends and I exaggerate, perhaps I would like a few more people to love me or to sympathize with me, whatever the case may be, or buy me booze. But what we have found is more often that some of the fake news generators are intent on causing harm, on destabilizing, you know, people, on influencing people to believe a falsehood, and so on and so forth. And that is where it becomes harmful to our societies. I cannot quote this back to you accurately, but some of you may know of the case in West Africa with the fake news around the Ebola crisis and what that meant. In South Sudan right now, there is a lot of fake news around statements that have been made by the Nua and Dinka in regards to power, staying there, legitimacy, and so on. In regards to troop movement, rebels, and so massacres that have led to, you know, the crisis we're having in South Sudan right now. So I applaud our rights as private citizens, but yeah, there must be some deliberate efforts to counter situations that actually cause harm.
Right. Do we have any other burning question? Because I'm looking at the time, and I think I will just give my panelists just one round for closing remarks, and then we'll close the show. Jimmy?
Thank you. All I'd say, I think we need to take these issues of fake news seriously if we value importance of information. If you're talking about importance of access to information, then we should be honest with ourselves that we're talking about information that is credible, information that is people-centered, not just information, basically, that is destructive. She's just mentioned about the Ebola issue in West Africa a year or two now ago. Really, one of the issues that made the whole thing worse is the fact that most people did not believe their government, especially in Liberia. They were told, given directions. Some people thought it's just a deliberate ploy. Somebody goes and steal mattresses and what have you in the hospitals, the OPL issue there. It's just a question of, people trusting each other's information. So we're talking about information here that really matters to society. Yes, we can lie in private, whatever homes. The beautiful thing about lying basically is that if it's not under oath, it's not illegal. You can lie the way you want. Nobody will arrest you. But in this case, we're talking about information that really matters to society. And journalism and media in general is central to it. Thank you.
So in Uganda, there is currently a debate on removing the presidential age limits, and the bill was presented. It's a private member's bill. And what I found was our parliament is very, very good at explaining now things like the private member's bill, what it is, what it does, why, and so on and so forth, like many are. Journalists, we aren't good at saying what it is that we do, explaining our processes, being transparent about why things lead to where they are. No wonder audiences then, are like, oh, well, I can take this journalism or I can leave it. I can take it from this unnamed source or leave it. I think that part of our response to the fake news phenomena, if I can call it that, is to say what we do, why it is important, what we do, and to make this publicly known over and over and over again to our audiences.
Tandy?
Just two thoughts. One, in response to the right to lie and freedom of expression. As much as we don't want over-regulation of the space, we need a bit of regulation of the space. And that's because people who have complete freedom to say what they want to say, you end up with instances like your classic penny sparrow cases with racist speech and harmful content. And people need to understand that there's a line where and where you draw it is what's important. But yeah, just it's interesting, and the issue around revenge porn, and it's one thing to lie, but it's another thing around intent. So I completely agree with my fellow panelists around that. And then also just to talk, or just to close with the issue of media's responsibility to increase their own credibility. And the more that media and journalists are able to disclose about their processes, about who they are, what they do, the better. Banks do it. The classic example of banks and phishing scams. If there's a scam going around, one of the first things you'll see when you look at an online bank, you can't even use your internet banking without having clicked on, yes, I see what you're warning me about, the phishing scams. And media should themselves take the same level of responsibility and increase their own credibility and transparency. And I'd love to talk to you after this. We've got another platform where we're actually targeting this exact issue around media disclosure and journalist disclosure, because that, if you communicate that to the public, it's one step closer to being able to differentiate between credible media and just, simple plots of misinformation and clickbait.
So thank you, guys. Thank you for this really rich conversation. I think our take-homes obviously are on media and digital literacy, but what are our responsibilities as the media as well, in terms of acknowledging that any information that goes out is actually critical if we're going to look at the importance of access to information for citizens. And I think one of the things is acknowledging also that within our African context, a lot of people do not have access to the media. So if there's fake news that's circulating, it's going to get to them anyway as fake news, but by word of mouth. So it has a ripple effect. And so I'd also like to thank the audience, and very good questions. And also I like the fact that we were moving from realities, from the newsroom to actual legislative processes that we're undergoing. So thank you so much.